To learn English, French, or pretty much any other natural language in the world, one has two components to tackle. Component A is the vocabulary of the target language. The English language has a little over 170,000 words, yet any speaker of the language will not be able to use or even recall the vast majority of these words. According to lexicographer Susie Dent and linguistics.com, the average active vocabulary of an adult English speaker is of around 20,000 words, with the passive one of around 40,000 words. The active vocabulary being words that one can use, and the passive vocabulary being words that one can recognize. That's a lot of words. It takes somebody living in a specific language-speaking environment for their entire life to reach this kind of fluency. However, for those of us wishing to learn a foreign language, we have the benefit of something called the 95-5 principle. The 95-5 principle, or the Pareto Principle Plus, is a variation on the 80-20 principle, in which it states that 20% of the work in the academic world amounts to 80% of the outcome. In the language learning world, the figure is known to steepen to 5% of the work creating 95% of the outcome. So we have our answer, right? We only need to know 1,000 words to get along just fine in English. Well, in theory. For reaching conversational fluency, a high intermediate level, one needs to know about 3,500 words in a target language like English. Not quite 1,000 basic words, but 3,500 is definitely easier to manage than 20,000. So great! We have the words after constant flashcard practice and various other methods of learning vocab.
I love this app.
But we're still missing one big part of the puzzle. Component B is the grammar. Depending on the target language you're trying to learn, this can be a neat little package similar to your own mother tongue, or it can be terrifyingly different, regardless of how beautiful it might be. As much as I have my own opinions on certain languages' grammar versus others, I'm going to try to stay away from linguistic prescriptivism and focus primarily on showing you the facts. Despite this, oh, who am I kidding? This language has a lot of... Yeah. For those outside the conlang or greater linguistics community, this language is a topic of either extreme indifference or extreme passion. Those that feel no particular way about this language realize that its speakers are few and far between, and it has had no real impact on the majority of languages, but others of us, like Mr. L.L. Zammenhof here, dream that a language like this gets its spot it deserves in the limelight. I'm sure you already know what I'm talking about. I mean, it's in the title. Let's talk about Esperanto. Esperanto simultaneously has many parent languages and none at all. How is this? Well, Esperanto is a conlang, a constructed language. This means that rather than like most languages, Esperanto was invented by the aforementioned Mr. Zammenhof. However, this language is purely based on other languages. Of course, certain phrases will bear striking similarities to phrases in other languages, and this is the curious thing. Esperanto is what I like to call the perfect European lingua franca. Let's go back to 1887, when Zammenhof first invented the language. At the time, Europe was a place of divided opinion. Strong nationalistic feelings, as well as global rebellion against the nationalism, was growing on the European continent. Zammenhof was a citizen of the Russian Empire who strongly believed in globalism. He's quoted as saying, "Were there but an international language, all translations would be made into it alone, and all nations would be united in common brotherhood." As a child, he grew up in a small city called Białystok, an ethnically divided city between the Russians, Poles, Germans, and Jews, Zammenhof himself being a Pole. The divided town inspired him to attempt to unite the world with a language easy enough to learn for as many people as possible. Thus was begot Esperanto. Previous to Esperanto was another language built for the same reason called Volapük. This video is not about Volapük, so I'll put a link in the description to a video made by a great linguistics content creator named Chidnoff. Anyway, I'll put his videos on conlangs like Volapük in the description below. To make a long story short, the Volapük community saw a divide between the creator of the language, who opposed reform, and several groups that wanted to see Volapük evolve. Many of the global thinkers that left the community after the fallout joined the Esperanto community, making it a formidable rival to Volapük, eventually surpassing it. Both languages had the same goal in mind, and so the languages were built very finely tuned, making both components A and B of the language very simple. In the beginning, Esperanto had only 900 root words and 16 rules of grammar. The rules have not changed since Esperanto's inception. Although vocabulary has grown noticeably, both components A and B have a reputation for being some of the most user-friendly stuff the language learning community has ever seen. Whereas entire books have been published on the whole of Spanish, English, or pretty much any other language's grammar, Esperanto's 16 rules can be summed up in an 11-page PDF. That'll be in the sources in the description. But hey, not mentioning anything is a bit of a cop-out, so let's look at some of the general rules Esperanto follows. Nouns always end in an O, and a J may be added to make it plural. They can fit into two cases, the nominative and accusative. If accusative, the noun gets an extra N tacked onto it. To get the past tense, change the A to an I, and to get the future tense, change the A to an O. Words are easily agglutinated in the language. Shortly, two words can be stuck together and it'll make grammatical sense. Really, going over much more of the grammar is kind of boring unless you want to actually learn Esperanto. Don't worry, plenty of resources will be linked in the description below for those of you that want that. But if you're not convinced just yet, Esperanto actually has benefits despite its small social impact on the world. Esperanto as a language is comparable to a recorder. Nobody aspires to be a world-class recorder player, but all of us still, in most of America at least, learn the recorder in school. Why is this? We're not learning the recorder to learn the recorder, we're learning through the recorder how to learn. Esperanto is the recorder of the language learning world, especially for European languages. Much of what Esperanto teaches you as far as the approach to language learning can be easily applied to other languages. Esperanto does this by giving its learners a crash course in how a language's components work. Not to mention, it also builds up your cognate bank, making vocabulary in several other languages much easier to learn. So what does Esperanto sound like? How is it written? Let's look at a few sentences in Esperanto. Le knabo ŝatas ludi kun lia fratino. The boy likes to play with his sister. This sentence, like many others in Esperanto, has the same word order as English, with the exception of how the infinitive is formed with the verb. Esperanto has two diacritics. The brave, which can only be used on the U, is pretty much just the regular U, but is used when the U is part of a diphthong and does not make its own syllable. I always equated it with the sound that a W would make. The circumflex, as we see in this sentence, adds an H after the letter it affects. In this sentence, it makes the S sound turn into the SH sh sound. Let's also take a closer look at the word for sister, fratino. A neat thing about Esperanto is that it makes nouns regarding humans very easy to learn. Much like the German Kellner versus Kellnerin, Esperanto has a built-in feminizing suffix, in, which comes before the final O of the noun. Like here, fratino meaning sister is the female form of frato meaning brother, both of which come from the original Latin word frater, roughly meaning brother or comrade. Take also for example this sentence, mi ne ŝatas manĝi brokolon. Let's try to decipher this one with only the knowledge we have so far. Well, me sounds exactly like the English me, so let's assume that it means I. Ne, it sounds like no and comes right before the verb. It must be a negator. Ŝatas? Well, we saw this in the last sentence, and we saw that it meant to like. This means we have I don't like so far. Next we have another infinitive, mangi. If you took French in school, this sounds a lot like the word manger, to eat, or the English manger, a feeding compartment for livestock. So it must mean to eat. The last word should be pretty self-explanatory. It looks like broccoli. So when we put this all together, we get the sentence, I don't like to eat broccoli. Despite not being all that mutually intelligible with English when spoken, the cognates and single components of the language make it very easy to pick up. The language was handcrafted to be the recorder of languages, and so learning Esperanto burst open the doors to so many other languages. Learning Esperanto will be worth your time, especially for those of you interested in learning more languages, conlanging, or just wanting something secretive to communicate with your friends in. Sources and language learning resources are in the description box below, and as always guys, stay curious.